Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best top laners for patch 6.17. I want to try to switch it up a little bit in this video though and try a different format. If you guys like this new format, then be sure to let me know down in the comments and be sure to leave a like. Now, if you don't like the format of this video here, then just let me know down in the comments as well. Leave a dislike if you don't like the new format, but I want to try to do something different and try to switch it up a little bit. So with that being said, let's get into the video. So first up is going to be Cassiopeia. Now, as you can see here, guys, the new format is going to be me talking about why and when you should pick the champion instead of the pros and cons to the champion. I feel like noting the pros and the cons can get a little bit repetitive because some people, they already know the pros to each champion and the cons to each champion, and therefore they really don't care to listen to that part of the video. They just care about which champions are on the list. So I feel like by talking about like why you should pick the champion, why are they good right now, and then when you should look to pick them is a little bit better. I don't know, let me know down in the comment section below, guys, like I said before. But why should you pick Cassiopeia? So you should pick her because she's great in melee matchups right now in the top lane. The one champion I do struggle against a little bit is Yasuo, because Yasuo can dash through minions and can avoid Cassiopeia's Q damage. Now, you can do well against Yasuo if you're really good on Cassiopeia, because you can plant your W down, which means that he won't be able to dash through those minions, but you do have to time that well, and you do have to make sure that he doesn't end up wind walling your ultimate, and then you're gonna miss out on a lot of damage if he does that. So I feel like the only one matchup I struggle with is Yasuo, but she does great against any other melee champion, just because once she does get Rylai's, she can kite them really hard, and they really can't do anything against her. She can also farm really easy in the laning phase with her E, which is why I like her a lot as well. I find that it's just really easy to CS with her because her E is a nice last hitting tool. She does have a very strong team fight. Now, Cassiopeia, once you get a few items on her, you do so much damage in team fights, and you also do provide good crowd control with your Rylai's and with your ultimate, as well as the slow from your W. So as long as you can position well in team fights as her, then you can carry really nicely. She's really good against enemy dive compositions, so if the enemy team does lock someone like a Kha'Zix or even a Rengar, you can do pretty well against them, because if they try to dive in on you, you could just throw your ultimate down and kill them before they even get out of your ultimate. It's actually kind of funny like playing against a Kha'Zix because he really can't do anything against the Cassiopeia. Now, moving on to when you should pick Cassiopeia. Now, these are like the best case scenarios as to when you would want to pick her for sure, but these aren't the only scenarios that you should be picking her. If you're a good Cassiopeia player, then you can pick her pretty much like into anything and you can still do really well. So if your team does lack damage, then you should definitely look to pick Cassiopeia because she provides great damage. If you do want a hard carry top lane champion, then you should definitely look to pick her up. And then if you are practiced on her, I would not pick her up unless you have tried her in normal games and have gotten a little bit used to her, because I do think she is one of the harder top laners. Next on the list is Malphite. So right now, why should you pick Malphite? So you should pick Malphite because he is pretty good right now against a lot of the meta AD top laners. We're seeing a lot of Yasuo being played in the top lane. We're going to be seeing more Riven this patch because of her buff, and therefore Malphite can do really well pretty much in any matchup where the enemy top laner is like auto attack based and they are AD. So Fiora he does pretty well against as well. When you are playing Malphite in the top lane, you want to play a little bit more passive in the early game against those top laners, because a Yasuo for the first few levels or a Riven can definitely kill you if they do run Ignite, but once you do get your armor items, they really can't do anything against you. And with this nice buff that Malphite got this patch to his W, it means he's going to be even tankier now, and he's going to be an even stronger pick if the enemy team does have like a full AD enemy comp. He is also a very strong engaged champion. He's a great team fighter due to his ultimate. So if you are a player who likes those team fight champions, then you should look to pick up Malphite. And then he's great in the squishy meta as well. We're really not seeing too many tanks being played right now, and therefore it just allows Malphite to get, or it just allows him to pick more targets in team fights to use his ultimate on. And if he does end up getting like a 3 or 4 man ultimate off on the squishy targets, then that means that they're probably going to die if your team does have good follow-up damage. And as for when you should pick Malphite, these are like the best scenarios as to when you should pick him. If the enemy team does have a lot of AD damage, if they're like a full enemy AD comp, then I would pick him up for sure. If your team is lacking engage, then I would choose him because he is one of the strongest engaged top laners. And then if they do pick a melee AD top laner, so someone like a Tryndamere, a Yasuo, a Fiora, a Riven, all of those top laners are AD and they do a lot of their damage from their auto attacks. So because of Malphite's E, when he slams the ground, it will reduce the enemy's attack speed by a certain percent. So it makes him a great pick against those champions just because of his E ability and the fact that he is going to build a lot of armor. Next up is Alawi. So first up, why should you pick Alawi? You should pick Alawi because she's a very strong laning top laner. She has a very good level 6, especially if she does have a few of her tentacles down, because if the enemy jungler comes to gank you and you're full HP, if they're like a squishy jungler, if they're not building Cinderhulk or they're not building any sort of HP, then your likelihood or your chance to 1v2 them is really strong as long as you don't get CC'd. If the enemy jungler is playing someone like an Elise or any jungler that can like crowd control you or can lock you up, then it is a little bit harder to win those 1v2s. But if it's someone like a Nidalee or a Lee Sin even, or just a jungler that doesn't have any crowd control like a Kha'Zix, then you can definitely turn a 1v2. And a lot of the times I see enemy players when they're playing against an Alawi, they call her like a BS champion and just a champion that has no counterplay, when in reality, the way you beat Alawi is once she places her ultimate down, do not fight her. Just back away because you're not going to win that 1v2 or that 2v1 against the Alawi if she does have her ultimate and if she does have like her tentacles just absolutely destroying you. So if you do try to gank an Alawi and she does throw her ultimate down, then just back out for a little bit, wait for her ultimate to run out, because even if like it's better to just let the Alawi live than to try to risk going for the kill on her, because if she does end up getting a double kill, she's gonna snowball really hard and be a very hard champion to deal with. She does have really good teamfight potential. Now, Alawi in teamfights, if you do CC her, then she can be fairly useless. But if you don't CC her and she can get a nice ultimate off, then she can deal a ton of damage. And she is also a pretty tilting champion as well, to be honest with you. I see so many players like just die to Alawi at level 6 because they don't know how to play against her. They just stand in her ultimate's damage and they just call her a cheap champion because she just presses R and she deals so much damage. Now, when should you look to pick Alawi? The most ideal situation to pick Alawi is if the enemy team does have a melee top lane champion. She can do a little bit, or she is a little bit weaker against like ranged top lane picks because she can get poked out. And she also is pretty weak if the enemy team does have like a hard CC enemy comp or like a lot of stuns or a lot of ways to lock you down, because in those team fights, if you can't be jumping around with your W and proccing your tentacles to go off, then you're not going to deal a whole lot of damage. And if the enemy team does have a dive comp, I would definitely look to pick her. She is really good against anyone who wants to dive on you, because if they dive on you and they stay on you, then you're going to deal so much damage with your ultimate up and with your tentacles. Next on the list is Wukong. So Wukong, why should you pick him? He is a very strong snowbally top lane champion, and he's also a very good teamfight champion. If you can get that one kill in lane with Wukong, then you've pretty much won your lane and you've pretty much won your team the game, because if you get a few items on him, your one-shot potential in teamfights is insane, and he also feasts on those low mobility AD carries that are being played right now. We're seeing a lot of Ashe, a lot of Jhin, we're seeing a lot of Jinx now after her buffs. So Wukong's just great against those AD carries, because if he dives in on them or if he goes for like a flash engage, then they're pretty much dead. They have no way of escaping Wukong, and because of his really good power spike, once he does hit level 11, he gets so much damage from his ultimate once he does hit that 11 spike. If he does start team fighting, then he's going to be able to blow up the enemy AD carries. Now, he does also have a pretty sneaky engage. It's hard to play against Wukong, and if you are playing against him, just make sure to grab a pink, because if you don't have it warded and you don't have like any vision on the Wukong, he could just end up sneaking, or he could just use his W in a brush and engage on you, and you're not even going to expect that, especially if he just does it from like a bush or if he does it from out of your vision range, and you could just end up getting blown up if you don't see the Wukong coming. He's also a fairly easy top lane champion to play. I'd say he's one of the easier champions, at least compared to someone like a Cassiopeia, that's for sure, or someone like a Gangplank, because when you're playing Wukong, your main objective is to dive on the backline, get a nice ultimate off, and if you can do that consistently, then you're going to be very successful on Wukong. Now, when you should pick Wukong, the best scenarios are when the enemy team does not have a whole lot of disengage. If they do have someone like a Janna or a Gragas, it's going to be harder for you to dive on that back line. And you should definitely look to pick him if the enemy team does have a squishier team comp. If they are tankier, like if they've got like a Maokai top lane and they have like a Gragas jungle or something, then I would not pick him in that situation, because number one, it's going to be hard for you to kill them because they're going to be building tank stats. And number two, you're just going to get locked down if you do try to dive in on the back line. And to round out this list, I have Kennen. So I just want to let you guys know that I really didn't pay too much attention to the order of this list. I don't think that Kennen is necessarily the best top laner right now. This list was kind of hard for me to come up with an order, so don't really pay too much attention to like the order of this list. All of these champions on the top 5 are definitely very strong picks. So why should you pick Kennen? You should pick Kennen because he's one of the best teamfight top lane champions, and like Wukong, he does feast on those low mobility AD carries that are being played right now. It's so hard to counter a Kennen if he does have his flash up and he does have Proto Belt, because what he does is he just looks for that AD carry to be out of position, he flashes in Proto Belts, and if the enemy team doesn't have someone like a Janna who can save their AD carry, then he's going to be able to one-shot the enemy AD carry in pretty much every single team fight, and it's just so annoying and so tilting to play AD carry against a good Kennen. And lastly, when should you look to pick Kennen? Kennen is a pretty versatile champion. You can pick him into pretty much almost anything and in almost any situation, but if the enemy team does have a Janna lock, then I wouldn't pick him in that situation. If the enemy team is very squishy, then that is a great time to pick Kennen, because it just means that in team fights, you're going to be able to melt those squishy targets with your AoE damage from your ultimate and your W, and you can basically single-handedly carry team fights. And you should also look to pick him if your team is lacking some AP damage. So you have like, if you have like an AD mid laner, someone like a Zed, and then you have like an AD jungler as well, then that would be a great situation to pick Kennen in the top lane. So moving on to the honorable mentions now, how I'm going to do these from now on, I think, is I'm just going to tell you guys all the champions that are on the honorable mentions at the start, and then I'll talk about one or two of the champions if they haven't showed up on my list for a while, or if they're making an appearance on my list for the first time. So the honorable mentions for this patch are Jace, Rumble, Riven, Pantheon, Gangplank, and Aurelia. So Jace and Riven both did get buffed this patch, and that's the main reason why they are on the honorable mentions. I really think that Jace was in a pretty good spot already in 6.16 as well as Riven, but with these buffs, it just allows them to snowball even harder now. And both of these champions, if you can get ahead with them in the early game, then you can take over a game. Jace's poke damage is absolutely crazy, and because we are in a relatively squishy meta right now, it just allows him to be even more effective, because he is a bit weaker if the enemy team does have a tankier comp, since his poke's not going to do too much damage against them. But if the enemy team does have a full squishy comp, then his poke is going to hurt a lot. And then as for Riven, her level 6 all-in is even stronger now due to her ultimate buffs, so if you're a good Riven player, then I would pick her up for sure. Now I want to touch on Gangplank here quickly, because he did go from like the best top laner in 6.16 to I think an okay pick now. He's still pretty good in 6.17, but his early game did take a really big hit, and if you can't survive the early game now as Gangplank and you fall behind, then you're going to be really weak, and it's going to be pretty hard for you to get to that mid to late game Gangplank. There are a lot of champions right now in the top lane that you can pick against him to counter him, like a Riven or a Jace for example. They can do really well against Gangplank, and they can shut him down in the early game. So as long as you can get past that early game as Gangplank and get your items, you can still be successful come the mid to late game. But I don't think he's not like that must pick or ban champion now this patch, because the average player I don't think is going to perform very well on him. So that's going to be all for this video, guys. Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below if you do like the format. If you don't, then I can go back to just doing the pros and the cons in the next video. So with that being said, guys, thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.